Rehabilitation for patients after amputation is quite a cyclical process, so I think we will be pioneers of all these innovations. Basically, of course, future rehabilitation will involve virtual reality and robotic technologies. I'm sure that soon we will somehow add artificial intelligence to this whole story. In any case, as the world develops, rehabilitation will keep pace.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. This is Volunteer About Volunteers, and today we have Mykita, a professional rehabilitation therapist, as our guest.
Hello.
Good day. A little about yourself so we know who you are, what you do.
Yes, Mykita Zhalnin, physical rehabilitation therapist. Over 14 years of experience in this field as of today. For the last 8 years, I have been more involved in medical management. I have launched rehabilitation departments both in Dnipro and abroad. Well, for the last slightly more than 2 years after the full-scale invasion, we have been working on the Path to Health project, rehabilitation of military personnel, veterans, and civilians affected by the war. And basically, this is now the main type of activity. I am one of the leaders in this project. But to not lose my skills, I also conduct consultation sessions, so I try to stay in the profession.
This is your profession. You earn money. But I understand that there is also an element of volunteering.
Well, let's say, unfortunately, we are not making money on this project today. This project was created, in general, because our neighbors pushed us to it when they attacked us in February 2022. And since, my profession turned out to be very necessary during the war, so I basically started thinking about how can I apply myself, how I could take on some front, take responsibility, and participate, contribute my small part to our future victory. And that's how Path to Health was born. My friends supported me, and now they are my partners. And this is a social project. That is, as of today, it is not a business because the majority of our patients are military personnel and veterans. Of course, for ethical reasons, we do not charge them. We do it for free. We do this as if it is funded by our charitable foundation because we have a licensed medical center, Path to Health, and a charitable foundation, Path to Health. But since we are quite good at medicine, but unfortunately, I cannot say the same about fundraising. We try to somehow cover our expenses by attracting funds, but we are much worse at this than treating and returning our defenders to normal life. Therefore, unfortunately, to this day, we are. The project itself is in the red, and we are forced to contribute our own finances as well.
I understand, and how do they contact you? I mean, are you in any databases? When a soldier undergoes rehabilitation, are they directed primarily to charitable foundations? And they redirecting to you? How do they reach you?
Well, first of all, we have a contract with the National Health Service of Ukraine. And, in general, we are on the list of institutions that have the right to provide rehabilitation services. We are also on the lists of our regional military administration as an institution that provides rehabilitation services. However, as practice shows, people come to us more through word of mouth, because to date, more than 750 recovered defenders, both male and female, have come to us after serious wounds and injuries. And in general, the flow through word of mouth is probably the largest. And we cooperate directly with some chief medical officers, we cooperate directly with some commanders, and they send guys to us. And we rehabilitate them. So, to say that we are in some databases, we probably are not there, but the flow is constant, and as of today, we are 100% full.
When you hear the word rehabilitation, the impression, well, I used to have, since I hadn't encountered it before. You go to a doctor, and he helps you either walk, or pick up a glass, or move your hands again. What kind of rehabilitation do you provide?
All that was listed is physical rehabilitation. In general, we work according to international standards. There are certain rules in this field. That is, the patient goes for an initial consultation with a multidisciplinary rehabilitation team. At this consultation, we study the patient's medical history, their current condition, and based on this, we develop an initial rehabilitation plan where we set SMART goals, meaning short-term goals that we aim for, and, let's say, a global goal, which is more long-term. However, we identifying exactly in which direction we are going in our rehabilitation journey. That is, rehabilitation in our center includes physical therapy, occupational therapy, hardware physiotherapy, and physical therapy in virtual reality. I will talk about this a little later, as it is a simulator in the development of which we took direct part. Massage, electrotherapy, psychotherapy, psychologist consultations, group, individual, family, and so on.
You mentioned that you have a center.
Yes?
How many people do you currently have working, specifically rehabilitation specialists?
Exactly 14 in the medical team.
These are different nosologies, different directions.
These are PRM doctors, physical therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapy assistants, now nurses, junior medical staff, and now a family doctor is gradually starting to practice with us. In total, as of today, 14 people.
What do you think is currently lacking, one might say, in the universe of rehabilitation in Ukraine? The most pressing issues. What needs to be changed, removed, or added?
Firstly, there is no program for the rehabilitation of military personnel. That is, if under the contract with the National Health Service of Ukraine, our institution receives compensation for the rehabilitation of the civilian population. It is quite small amount, less than $200 per patient. However, it is at least something. So for the military, there is no such adapted program, because we, of course, understand that a civilian comes in with, say, back pain, and we can fit within $200 to achieve a result. And a soldier comes after a mine explosive injury or after a limb amputation, whose rehabilitation continues for 4 months. And of course, this is not about $200. Therefore, first, a rehabilitation program for soldiers is needed from the state, a program specifically for compensating this rehabilitation.
I understand it is about the initiative to support you, but you understand that the government will not do it on its own. So what do we need for rehabilitation? We will develop this and that. Do we have any leading expert in the field of rehabilitation who is concerned about this issue? Because bureaucracy always eats away at the overall picture. And until you properly complete the documentation, you won't get it done. I encounter something similar, but in a different direction. I understand that from rehabilitation, from people who deal with professional rehabilitation, a leader is needed. Do we have someone, or is someone taking care of it? Maybe there is someone in the ministry?
Here, the key story is that we are a leader in the field of rehabilitation. Well, for example, I consider us a leader in this area because we launched several unique programs that were later adopted by all of Ukraine in this direction. But, as you correctly noted, there is a lot of bureaucracy here, and it's a whole separate area. Yes, if you start trying to fight with the state and demand from it, you will lose your time, and that's it. This program really needs to be taken care of. Unfortunately, we have such a large flow of patients that we simply do not have the time, and honestly, we lack the energy and inspiration to also take care of this. And in general, I believe that the medical reform that took place in 2019 in Ukraine was not prompted by any private individuals or private institutions. It was simply a normal adaptation of the medical sector to new realities. And just like the war, these are new realities for us. And I am sure that the state has a large apparatus that needs to understand this and adjust the whole situation. So I don't think we can influence this globally in any way.
I understand. You said that you have several unique projects that have been adopted by all of Ukraine. Can you, if it's not a secret, share a few of them?
One of the programs we have, which, in general, we can say that we are, I don't know, trendsetters in this field. It is a full-cycle rehabilitation program after limb amputation. This is a program that was essentially developed by our team, and it differs from those accepted before, in that we start rehabilitation even before, long before the moment of prosthetics. That is, we prepare the patient, prepare their functional state, the condition of their muscles, and psychological state for future prosthetics. And only after the patient has undergone this basic preparation, and then they receive a training prosthesis. We work with the training prosthesis for some time, learning to stand on two supports and shift the center of gravity. We work on balance, overall coordination, and so on. Only after this is the permanent prosthesis fitted. And then, again, we fully adapt the patient to using the permanent prosthesis in daily life and, in general, in everyday life. Overall, this takes approximately 3.5 to 4 months from the moment the patient comes to us to the moment of complete mastery of the prosthesis.
Understood. You said you start the rehabilitation program even before there is a blogger. So I understand correctly. There is a permanent prosthesis and a training one. And you start working even before the training one is available. Previously, you only started with the training one. Is that the system?
Well, we started working earlier, yes, when there are two supports, and already there we taught walking with two supports.
You said that before the full-scale one, you weren't involved in such volunteering. What exactly were you doing? So you were earning money on that, right?
Yes, yes. Before the full-scale invasion, I was working as a physical rehabilitation therapist and partially as a medical manager.
And before this, did you collaborate with the military?
I have my acquaintances. Unfortunately, they were my military acquaintances, whom I just, well, of course, with them, you could say it was on a volunteer basis. When they needed help, they reached out, and I helped them a little with their physical condition.
I know you also have a story that one of the employees was abroad, and when the full-scale invasion began, he returned, if I'm not mistaken, he was in China.
This is one of our founders, the co-founder of our center, Oleksiy. At the time when the full-scale invasion began, he was already in Ukraine, but he returned to Ukraine consciously, as if he was coming home. Yes, but he returned before the full-scale invasion, before it started.
So he had the opportunity to go, but he stayed, right?
Yes, he definitely had the opportunity to leave. But as soon as the war started, instead of ending up somewhere at the border and leaving the country, he went with the second partner, Stanislav. They gathered and went to Mariupol to evacuate people from there. Lost many vehicles there, managed to make several such trips, and in general, evacuated a considerable number of people.
Well done. You said you are attracting foreign funds. How to say it correctly, that's right. Through a charitable foundation. What do you face? What is the main problem? Bureaucracy, I understand. But what else is there?
We don't actually have a bureaucracy problem. We have a charitable foundation in the Netherlands. We created it. Well, our friends from the Netherlands helped us create a charitable foundation for our project. It's called Ever on Heart for Way to Health. warm heart for the way to health. And we spent a lot of time, because in Ukraine it's easy to create a charitable foundation, but in Europe it's quite a difficult, lengthy, and bureaucratic process. It took us about a year to properly package and create everything. And currently, this fund is operational. Additionally, it has received tax-deductible status, meaning if Dutch companies donate to this fund, they receive tax benefits. This was also a separate journey. Also not easy, but we went through it too. Well, but still, as I said from the very beginning, we are unfortunately not professionals in fundraising, so we attract funds from abroad. It's a bit of an overstatement, but we do have that opportunity, and I hope that in the future, we will attract more funds from abroad, of course. Well, my goal and my desire, in general, is that, well, 90% of the funds for the rehabilitation of our defenders should come from abroad. Well, I believe that this is economically more correct for the country and for us. And it is also more correct because we no longer want to take money from our citizens. So, we almost don't do any. Well, we have some separate fundraisings left where we just collect donations in a jar, but we almost don't do them anymore. We used to do them. Now we don't. Not because they became less effective, but because, well, somehow, we ourselves have a block that we don't want to collect from ordinary citizens anymore, because people really give a lot for this, and everyone somehow needs to, continue living. Therefore, within the country, we rely more on the support of businesses, large businesses. We are only now starting to work in this direction, hopefully. There will be some successes over time. Well, overall, yes, of course, we would like to receive more support from abroad.
I think everything will be fine in this regard.
We are working.
Everything will be fine. Thank you very much for watching us. Be sure to subscribe because we need it, and we are waiting for your comments. We talked before about physical rehabilitation, but how does psychological rehabilitation happen? Who works in this field of specialists? A little about that.
Here, I want to make a remark right away and tell an interesting story about psychological rehabilitation. When we just opened, the first year of work, it was very difficult to get anyone to see a psychologist because, unfortunately, our people have a certain block. There is a certain association that if I'm sent to a psychologist, it means I'm somehow not right, sick, and so on. And in the first year, we were looking for humane ways to do all this so that people would at least get acquainted with what a consultation with a psychologist is. Well, but after a year, we didn't find any humane ways, so we decided to resort to less humane measures, but nevertheless, they worked. Just when a person comes to us for initial consultations, when we plan the rehabilitation process, we, in the form of an ultimatum, say that, well, your rehabilitation is free, and for this, you only need to attend a consultation with a psychologist once, just an introductory session, and after this one time, you are free to choose whether you continue or say that you don't want to, right? And here, we no longer influence this choice.
What percentage remains?
So, interestingly, in terms of conversion, 70% of our people, even more, don't want to go even to the first. Well, I mean, we encounter resistance there, but they have no choice. As it were, they still end up at this consultation. And to date, this is already a sample of more than 100 patients. 0% refused the second session. So, well, it's a really great story because people come to the first consultation, realize that they are not being treated as abnormal, that they genuinely want to help them, and plus, they really like the approach of our professional specialist who works with them. And they stay, well, some go through 15 sessions after this, some go through 2 or 3 sessions, and then, basically, say that, well, I feel much better now. I don't need to continue. So, therefore, well, this is a remark, an interesting story, in my opinion. In general, we have a psychologist, a psychotherapist, and for particularly difficult cases, we have, well, sort of on an outsourcing basis, our acquaintance, psychiatrist Konstantin Sihuta. This is quite a well-known name in this field in our city. Thank him. When we need it, when difficult cases occur, he also accepts our patients for free and helps with medication therapy. And as a psychotherapist, he also helps to slightly return to a normal state. And we have quite a few successful cases where we helped guys recover from very severe PTSD. Well, and some of these guys still occasionally call me and boast about how they managed to handle a situation that they previously wouldn't have resolved without conflict. Thanks to the fact that they worked through all these moments, they come out without conflict, and each time they are happy about it, they call back and tell me how cool it is. So, that's how it is.
Well, when you get such feedback, you need to work. You want to work. And do you also collaborate with foreign representatives in the rehabilitation world? Is someone abroad helping us?
Maybe, in general, someone is helping someone in Ukraine. Well, how to say? Individual volunteers come to us, including doctors who come to our center. Just recently, for the second time, we had a trauma doctor from the United Kingdom, Victoria. She really likes it here, and when she has the opportunity, she comes and conducts some workshops. But there's this moment that when she first arrived, she thought she would give us a master class, but she had, conditionally. I don't remember exactly now. Well, conditionally. Her master class was scheduled for Thursday, and she arrived on Tuesday. And on Tuesday and Wednesday, she was just at our medical center observing the work. And basically, on Wednesday, she already told me that, unfortunately, I can't call this a master class because, well, I understand that I have nothing to teach you. Well, you do it very cool. But she said, since I'm already here, tomorrow I'll just work as part of the rehabilitation team. Well, we, of course, still perceived it as a master class. Indeed, she didn't show us anything globally new, but nevertheless, it was interesting. And the second time, we also set aside a day for her, and we gladly, well, again, to say we are gaining experience is incorrect, because who is more experienced in military trauma rehabilitation than Ukrainians? Well, no one can teach us this, unfortunately or fortunately, but nevertheless, we are open to it, to any learning, to any cooperation. There are, by the way, clinics in Scotland. This is also our friend, an ethnic Ukrainian, but a citizen of the United Kingdom, Oleg Dmitriev. He has a charity fund in the United Kingdom called Sunflower Scotland, and he helps our center. And so, for example, some clinic in Scotland is closing, and he has a lot of equipment, very specific, that we simply don't have in Ukraine. He connects with me via video call, walks around the warehouse, shows me, and I point with my finger and say what we need. Sometimes I can point out what they don't want to give up, but Oli fights for it and still brings it to us, so. Well, therefore, this kind of separate help from individual volunteers, from individual people, is somewhat, conditionally, an organized structural systemic help. At least for us, it is not there yet. But I am sure that it's not because it doesn't exist, but because, again, we haven't knocked on the necessary doors to get it. Because, for example, from the first day of work, we needed a shockwave therapy machine. It's a must-have device for us because we would probably use it with more than 80% of our patients. But it is very expensive, meaning we cannot afford it.
How much does it cost?
Well, the one that would suit us costs, if we take a new one, around 14,000 euros. Well, for us, that's quite expensive, because whenever we have such purchases in mind, we always measure it. How many of our people can we rehabilitate with that money? And we always choose to rehabilitate, say, 30 more people, rather than buy one device. And so, unfortunately, we still cannot afford it. But, for example, we would be satisfied with a used device, which are very, very common abroad. But we keep knocking. But so far, again, we haven't found such a device, even abroad. Although it's common equipment, not some niche product. But nevertheless, we haven't achieved this yet. Therefore, we have hints and an understanding of how we could be helped from abroad. But again, so far, this is such targeted pinpoint assistance from individual volunteers.
I have a story. I have a friend. I consider him a friend. He is a former military man. He was injured. He is a veteran. And he once said, I would really like to... He underwent rehabilitation in the west of the country. He says, I would also like to be a rehabilitation therapist. Do we have any maybe courses, maybe training specifically for military personnel, so that a soldier can come and immediately receive both occupational rehabilitation and help others?
In our personal experience, we had such a case, and we will basically return to this practice. When we rehabilitated our first guy with an amputation, precisely within this full rehabilitation cycle, we involved in his recovery. A boy who had an amputation back in the anti-terrorist operation in 2015, and who at that time already had 8 years of experience using a prosthesis, and they had very similar amputations in terms of height and so on. And so we involved him in a few sessions. Because he even told us details that even we, as specialists, do not understand. Well, after all, a person who has lived with a prosthesis for 8 years understands very deeply all the nuances of everyday use of a prosthesis. And he talked about things that we would not have thought of for a long time. And so, basically, he has his own life, as it were. And obviously, we couldn't collaborate on a permanent basis. But now already, that very boy, whom he helped to recover, he has been on a prosthesis for almost a year now, and so he is already quite experienced too. And sometimes, when needed, we involve our first patient, whom we rehabilitated, to support new patients who have recently undergone amputation. By the way, also I can't say, it's correct to call it not a case, but an action that we do periodically. Currently, we also have a patient undergoing rehabilitation after a lower limb amputation. It's a fairly high amputation, quite complex, but for now, everything is quite good. That is, he is already on a permanent prosthesis, continues to recover now, and we have already traveled with him twice to one of the clinics, for safety reasons I will not name which one, where there are a large number of patients who have just recently undergone amputation, and we just take him because he is well compensated. It has been only 4.5 months since his amputation, and he is already on the main prosthesis, moving without any aids, meaning without a cane or crutches, just on his own 2 feet. And we went with him twice to that clinic, and a girl who works there came to us, guided us through the wards where the guys with recent amputations are, and he just talked to them a little, motivated them, inspired them. showed that 4.5 months, and what a great result. And that life does not end there, that you just need to gather strength, patience, motivation, and move forward. And regarding the question specifically about courses. Well, the point here is that if we are talking about medical rehabilitation, well, education is necessary here. It's like, well, it's not a conditional, I don't know, massage. Although I, for example, as a medic, believe that even to do massage, medical education is also needed. Well, within the framework of such cooperation, when a former military person who understands the psychology of the military and can help as a consultant in some way, I don't know if there are such courses. But we, for example, are ready to involve such people in the work, and in the course of this work, well, to understand and adapt how and in what way they can be useful. It's kind of an interesting experience for us. So, regarding courses, I don't know. Regarding direct work in this field, it's questionable because education is needed. But joining as volunteers for support is a great story.
Well, I'm curious, when you already have a permanent prosthesis and time passes, do you still need to undergo some other rehabilitation after a while? Or how does it work?
Well, of course, rehabilitation for patients after amputation is quite a cyclical process.
Is this an ongoing story or?
Not constantly, but I think, again, we don't have the experience, for example, of 5 years yet. Chronologically, logically, we don't have it yet. I think that probably from 3 to 5 years is the final, yes, the final term of their rehabilitation. Amputation. But here, you need to understand that, depending on the rehabilitation period, everything is very different. Well, for example, why, for instance, do I not recommend our patients to get prosthetics abroad? It's not that I don't recommend it. I just, well, for those who will see us, if, God forbid, you or someone you know has had an amputation, and someone decides that now you will help, gather, say, 60,000 euros and go to Germany to get a super-class prosthesis, please.
I'm hearing this thought for the first time because before I heard, you need to go abroad.
No, please. Under no circumstances do this. You will do the patient a disservice. I will explain why now. The thing is, well, firstly, we have great prosthetics provided by the state program. These are really high-quality, expensive, cool prosthetics. Yes, they are not the peak of technology available today, but they are very high-quality prosthetics. Secondly, the patient in the first year after prosthetics has to service their prosthesis, well, on average, 40 times. That is, 40 times is the average in the first year. The patient needs to go to the prosthetics center to adjust something, tighten something. If it's an above-knee amputation, for example, move the knee forward a bit, or push the foot slightly back. Somewhere dash.
Can you make an analogy like with braces to understand?
Yes, maintenance is constant on the start. And the fact is that our prosthetists do not encounter high-tech foreign prosthetics, and they do not know how to service them properly. And so, conditionally, for a person to service this prosthesis well, it logically makes sense for them to return to the place where this prosthesis was installed, or to the nearest European city where there are people who work with this unit, with this prosthesis. Well, you can't travel 40 times to Warsaw, for example, and that's just a rough example, because it's not certain that they work with high-tech prosthetics in Warsaw. Therefore, the first prosthetic must definitely be obtained in Ukraine, and it should be serviced in Ukraine during the first year. Especially now, under the new program, when you have been using a permanent prosthesis for a year, you can also get an electronic prosthesis. This is a prosthesis with an electric drive, which is more technological.
Also production in Ukraine?
No, we do not fit prostheses made in Ukraine. All our components are American, European. We do not fit our prostheses. Military prostheses. As I said, the prosthesis that is fitted for our military, permanent, well, the permanent prosthesis we fit, there is almost nothing Ukrainian in it. Well, maybe some components there, like some bolts might be Ukrainian.
For some reason, I thought we had full assembly.
No, we only assemble them here. I mean, they install.
We have production like, no, not a single element.
No, maybe there are, but the quality might not match. Look, the state prosthetics program of Ukraine today is the best in the world. And it's not just me saying this, it is recognized as the best in the world. Because our military personnel are given a prosthesis. Firstly, this assembled prosthesis, the one given to our military, costs more than 1 million hryvnias. So, yes, it's not 5 cents. Obviously, it's not a wooden stick. Secondly, every 3 years, they receive a new prosthesis. No country in the world today has such a powerful program. What does that mean? For example, you received your first prosthesis of a certain brand, but during its use, you read literature, gathered information, and decided you want to try a component from another manufacturer. For instance, you received a British one, but you want to try an American one in the same price segment. So, 3 years pass. You keep that first prosthesis. No one takes it away from you, but you're given a new one after 3 years, where you can request, I want this kind of joint now. And you have 2 prostheses now, meaning one for everyday use, one for going out, so to speak, right? A very cool program, and that's why the first prosthesis must be obtained in Ukraine to make it easy to service. In addition, you must choose a prosthetics center that is part of a network. Well, for example, this is not an advertisement. As they say, these are our partners, friends. Prosthetics Center Without Limits. I personally adore them. Adore them at least because they are probably, well, at least one of the few, or maybe the only prosthetics center that provides prosthetics to our patients in advance. So, when a patient doesn't yet have all the documents, they fit a permanent prosthesis, and only after 3 to 4 months can they receive compensation for that patient. They do this also for ethical reasons, so the person doesn't just lose time. This is very cool, and we are very, very grateful to them for this. And, for example, their network is in 10 cities. Why is this great? Because, hypothetically, you got a prosthesis in Dnipro today, and tomorrow you decide that you have always dreamed of living in Lviv. You moved, and in Lviv, there is a branch of it. Well, or even if you are there, well, that is, 10 branches, we understand that throughout Ukraine somewhere, at an accessible distance, you will have no limitations. This is very important because it will be easier for you to get service. That is, when you move, you simply notify your branch, and this branch ceremoniously hands you over to another branch, where they will take care of you just as well. So, the first prosthesis must definitely, like a mantra, I've said this 10 times already, must be obtained in Ukraine. But after you've walked for a year, after those 40 times, because the first year is the hardest. Later, the maintenance of the prosthesis, it kind of decreases in the necessity for such frequent servicing. So, for a year, they went through recovery, learned to use a prosthesis, adapted, integrated. Everything's great. But if you want to squat with a barbell, then yes, start fundraising. Go and get yourself high-tech prostheses abroad, but make sure to keep the original one too. Ordinary, although it is also quite cool. Well, and you get more advanced, new ones. Well, I can summarize it like this, because many make the mistake of immediately wanting to do it abroad, thinking it's better way. But in reality, they come back. Something is wrong with the prosthesis, or the stump is still alive. Maybe some swelling has gone down, or, on the contrary, something, and the center of gravity is slightly just shifted, and the patient is uncomfortable and doesn't know what to do about it.
Now I understand. I somehow had the thought that we could manufacture. And if we take the top 3 prosthetics in the world, you said there's British, American, which is the coolest one?
Honestly, I can't even answer that question. Why? For example, we have experience. One of our patients had a German. Yes, I guess it's German one, I think. British. And the last one, Indian. And for me, for example, I liked the most, oh no, the second one was not British, but Turkish. Yes. So, I liked the Turkish and Indian ones more, and that first one is in last place for me. Honestly, I don't remember if it was American or German made. Well, something from Western countries. I liked the Turkish and Indian ones much more. But again, it's all individual. Different patients suit different knee, for example, modules. And here, it needs to be selected quite individually. I can't say that if I liked these two more, they are better, because for someone else, they might not be as comfortable. Well, that's why I can't really say a top 3.
Everyone has their own.
I think we haven't yet seen the Chinese market in this regard. It would be interesting to see, because I think they would probably be in the top 3. But well, for now, we haven't seen them yet. Well, here you need to understand that the technologies are more or less the same for everyone today. If we are talking specifically about this basic prosthesis, which is provided through the state program, that is, medium-class technology as of today, and in general, all brands that produce them, well, they differ little except for some specific settings and so on. Therefore, I will not single out anyone specifically.
Understood. Do you have plans to open a branch in other cities in the future?
In general, we have a goal and plan to be everywhere without limitations. That is, the organization without limitations. 10 branches. Yes, we also dream and plan for 10 branches, because that would be logical.
Because it's easier to work in cooperation, that's all.
I think that we are working closely together because our collaboration yields excellent results. Without undue modesty, I am confident. I don't know this for certain, but based on my experience, I am 100% sure that we are breaking all possible world records today in terms of the speed of adaptation for patients with amputations.
Are there enough specialists overall in the situation?
We train specialists, so we have enough. Well, let's say we immediately adopted such a strategic milestone that we do not compete for existing specialists. I'll explain why. Because war trauma is a specific, a very narrow focus. And so I, for example, a good specialist within the country, a rehabilitation specialist, with a great experience. Well, but when the war started and patients with war injuries appeared, well, I was just as confused as everyone else. Because, of course, you can somehow adapt your experience, but war injuries have their own specifics. And so, we decided that there is no point in competing for specialists who already have experience, because they still won't be able to use their experience, which increases their value, as effectively in this new direction. And therefore, all our staff is young, but as of today, They are already among the most experienced in Ukraine, specifically in war trauma. For example, the head of our rehabilitation team, also Mykita, is 24 years old. But basically, all 750 soldiers and veterans we had went through his hands. Similarly, we have different ages, but we don't have medical staff over 40 years old.
If we talk about the future of rehabilitation, in which directions do you think it will develop? And maybe there are some innovations that the whole universe will follow and be like, wow, Ukraine, first and foremost, ahead.
Well, right now we are influencing, including our project, the future of rehabilitation. This is where we can talk about the VRNow simulator we created. It is for the rehabilitation of motor disorders and pain syndrome in virtual reality. This simulator was technically created by the company Edwin, a Ukrainian IT company that is a leader in the VR technology market in our country. And we, as medical professionals, from our rehabilitation perspective, acted as consultants on what exactly needed to be created. Because technically, they can do anything. But what exactly it should be and what is needed, they did not understand.
Can you tell a little about what exactly? Yes, VR. Is it something you put on and how does it work?
This is professional equipment for immersion in virtual reality. That is, sensory sensors are attached to the patient's feet, lower back, and hands, and a helmet is put on. The patient first enters an introductory room, where there is, conditionally, a table similar to ours. On this table, there are some, well, these are not simulators. I don't know. Like, there's a stand with sticks. Yes. And in this introductory room, the patient gets adjusted to how it all works. And so he has to approach this table, take out this stick and put it back in this niche, for example, or take it out and throw it somewhere, depending on the discretion and imagination of the specialist controlling this process. This all happens, that is, in this introductory room, the patient, basically, gets acquainted, sorry for the tautology, with what virtual reality is, where he is, how it works. Next, there is a room specifically for physical therapy. This is one of the rooms, an occupational therapy kitchen, where the patient goes. There, almost every object and detail of the interior can be interacted with. And again, under the guidance of a rehabilitation specialist, the patient performs some instructions there. For example, take a steak, put it in the grill, cover the grill, so it cooks. You can do that, or take milk, put it in the fridge, or take eggs out of the fridge and break them all over this room. Well, usually, in this room, everyone really likes to break everything. There. We initially, by the way.
Anti-stress.
Yes. At first, by the way, objects weren't being broken. But when we realized that 10 out of 10 of our first patients wanted to throw that plate on the floor, Edwin and I decided that everything should be breakable there. And now, everything is being broken. And everyone is breaking everything there, in short. That's why it's very good that this room is in virtual reality, because it would be very expensive for us if it were a real room. There is a gym where you can, well, not play, but do exercises with a soccer ball and a basketball. And there is a room for interactive games. That is, well, conditionally, the patient has a dysfunction, like, of the right hand, the range of motion is reduced. We set this amplitude in the program before starting, so the program understands that this is the maximum amplitude for this patient. And, for example, we start a game where the patient controls a bird with this hand and has some obstacles by flying at the amplitude, at their maximum amplitude, or catch some objects that fly at him, or Take two colors, like swords, and different objects start flying at him, and he has to not only physically, hit them back, but also think about which hand to use, because only, the blue sword can interact with the blue object that's flying, and green with green. So, that's it, in short. By the way, now there's also a box room, but we didn't manage to test it. Our laptop died a little. I don't know why. It's currently being serviced, so we didn't manage to. But once the laptop is back, we'll definitely test box.
Well, he said, I have this image, like from an American science fiction movie, something like that.
That's how it looks, because it's important to note that basic equipment is not suitable for this simulator, meaning, for example, VR glasses from PlayStation won't work. They simply can't handle this sensitivity, and the sensors won't work either. That's why we have Valve equipment. Well, the set of this equipment costs more than 10,000 euros just to implement it. And I won't even mention the cost of this software. So it's quite an expensive thing, but very effective. For example, I can say that when I was talking about the amplitude, when a patient gets in and starts controlling this bird, their amplitude immediately increases by 15%. Because in this gamified form, the patient just slightly forgets and is super interested in it. And somehow, he doesn't even realize it.
Gets carried away.
But gets carried away, yes, and really reaches such super abilities and shows very cool results. That's why we will be, I think, the pioneers of all these innovations, and in general, of course, the future of rehabilitation is definitely with virtual reality, robotic technologies, and I'm sure that soon we will somehow add artificial intelligence to this whole story. Well, in any case, as the world develops, rehabilitation will progress alongside this development.
Thank you very much for what you do, and thank you very much for today's conversation. I wish you all the best, may everything be well, and thank you again for what you do.
And I, as always, will summarize. We conduct interviews with our patients, so in every interview, I read this like a mantra. Friends, everything we talked about today, we can do together because we run social projects. A social project can only exist and develop with the support of caring people. Therefore, you can join what we are doing. Feel like full participants in this process, helping us either financially, with material and technical equipment, or simply with your participation. And we will be grateful, and together, I am sure, we will restore all our defenders. This is our duty, I believe, to help them return to a full life. Thank you.
And thank you. Very cool. Wow.